Hi everyone, Max here, Climbing Majority. Thanks for tuning in today and being a part of our growing community of climbers around the world. This podcast was created for climbers by climbers, and it means so much to us to have you here. In this episode, we have a conversation with registered physiotherapist and climber Quinn Turner. I found Quinn's Instagram account at Alpine Physio and was truly inspired by his content. Quinn resides in North Vancouver, BC, where he works out of Bodywork Sports Physiotherapy and Kinematics Sports Medicine and Rehab. He began his studies at the University of Calgary, obtaining his Bachelor of Science in Kinesiology, and later receiving his Master's from the University of Alberta. Quinn specializes in concussion and vestibular rehabilitation, but treats a wide range of ailments found in the life of a climber. Like all of us, Quinn has a strong passion for the mountains. He's an experienced Nordic skier, hiker, and climber. In our conversation, we cover topics such as the accidents that inspired him to become a physio, concussions, their severities, symptoms, and the healing processes, the physics of helmets and their effectiveness in climbing. We discuss evidence-based rehabilitation and outdated medical practices that are still being prescribed today. And finally, we dive deep into the mysterious pulley injuries and its relations to crimping and dynamic movement. Wicked, man. How's it going?
Oh, it's going well, fellas. How are you guys?
Yeah,
Excellent.
doing pretty good.
Stoked to be on here with you.
Sweet. Yeah, no, stoked to have you on.
Yeah, Max, how do you guys know each other, if you do at all?
Instagram, man. The
Okay.
lovely new digital age of social media, and I found Alpine Physio, which I was like, oh, that's super, interesting and incredibly relevant. So, and that's how that happened. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Quinn, are you a climber?
I am a climber. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Sweet.
So I've been. I'm a. I guess physio first, climber second, or vice versa. But I got into climbing about 10 years ago, and it similar as everyone, it seems to consume you, right? It's kind of starts as hiking, then gets into scrambling, and suddenly you found yourself in a van in Squamish for months on end, right? So
Yeah.
but no, I'm a physiotherapist. I work in North Vancouver. I grew up in Calgary. Basically lived in Calgary my entire life. Did my undergrad at the University of Calgary. Got a bachelor's of science there in kinesiology, and then I moved up to Edmonton for a couple of years. Did my master's of physiotherapy there, and then recently, actually, met myself and my partner. We moved to North Vancouver, so now we're stationed here, and I'm working both on the North Shore as well as downtown.
What sparked the move for you?
Yeah, so it would basically come as our climbing trips. So we came out here, we loved it. It felt very homey, right? And so eventually we kind of just made the decision that it was time to move and to get away from the cold and the blistering temperatures here, and decide to make our move to Squamish, where it's a little bit more cruisy, and we can spend some more time on rock.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Fair enough. Do you like ice climb at all?
I used to, yeah. It's and I think the risk management has caught up to me on that forefront, where I'm not willing to take the same level of risks that I used to, and ice climbing really is at its core a lot of heavy risk, right? So that's kind of as I got a little bit softer, I guess, with age. I've kind of weaned that out, but I used to be quite a nice climber. That's kind of how I got into climbing. That's how I spent my winters for a number of years there. About 7 years I spent ice climbing, but I don't think I'm into it anymore.
Yeah, fair enough, man. Yeah, I was gonna say though, if you're still into it a whole bunch, moving on the West Coast compared to Alberta, that's gonna be a big difference. But it sounds like you're gonna be doing just fine.
Yeah, it's an easy out, right?
It sounds like there's a story attached to that. Did you have a close call or anything?
You know what? I didn't have any particular close calls, except I think ice climbing in itself is just a series of small close calls, right? There really is enough times where I've looked back and been like, oh yeah, there's enough wind loading up there that something could have happened, or a detached flake or whatever else. Where it's the stoke is definitely weaned for that pursuit, and now I'm just into the skiing, and the rock climbing seems to be my source of fun.
Cool. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting story. It's the I guess it might be the Canadian way where like, oh, I got into climbing by starting ice climbing. You know,
Yeah.
I never heard that before until I met Max, and now this is another story. So definitely cool. A really interesting way to get into the sport is just straight into ice climbing. It seems so foreign to me because out here it's like a mystic sport almost.
I think you also got to look at climate a little bit because like what's the climbing season in Alberta, Quinn?
Yeah,
What do you guys?
it's like a month and a half maybe.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so in Alberta, it's like the climbing season runs. It's absurd. Like you can climb ice into April, higher in the Alpine and stuff, and then you guys get like a couple months of rock, and then it's like boom, right
Right
back to
back to
like
it. Yeah, by
world
October.
class ice climbing all again. So
Yeah.
and the ice there is just like
So good.
it's mega. It's just on a different scale, right? So it's so common for everybody there to
It makes
to
sense.
just, I mean, yeah, if you're gonna
Yeah.
be climbing ice, it's a pretty natural extension there for sure.
Oh, for sure.
When you got into climbing itself, did you have like a mentor? Did you just go after it? You want to kind of talk about maybe just very briefly those beginning stages of the first
Oh,
few
for sure.
years?
Yeah, so it seems to run in my family a little bit. My uncle's a ACMG guide, and he lives in Penticton now, and he actually runs Skaha Rock Climbing Adventures. So he's kind of been he lived the dirtbag life there for the better part of 45 years. So he's kind of been around the world and done it all, sort of thing. And then that was a bit of mentorship that kind of brought me into it to start, or just a source of stoke, I would say maybe. But then even going forward, really, it was more about reaching out to potential mentors and almost going through a little bit of a weaning process of kind of who's a good fit and who's safe and who's not. And looking back, I don't know if I had the best judgment of character of who I was being mentored by, but I survived and we're here now. So we know a little bit better as we've kind of gone through the stages.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one that like finding a mentor is such like a particular thing and getting a partnership where you both have like similar temperaments and goals and stuff like that can be really tricky and difficult. So I think that's an interesting fine line to walk and it can be really tricky to do,
Oh yeah.
but like so crucial.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something we've touched on a lot for sure.
And the thing is too, like you kind of look back on it and you realize you did some Gumby stuff, right? So if I was to do it all again, I'd definitely start with my courses, and I wouldn't start with a couple years of ice climbing before you kind of get into rope rescue and all that sort of management. But
Yeah.
you can only hindsight 2020, right?
It's just a super common thread. I think even with professionals, we've talked to a few guides and they have their stories of like, yeah, like I had so many close calls in my first year of trad climbing. Like
Mhm.
I was completely in over my head. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was completely full of stoke and excitement. And that's what carried me through. And a lot of them consider themselves lucky to be on the other side. And I think that a lot of people can relate to that exact experience.
Totally, it's such a commonality in this sport, and even like reading climbing like autobiographies of lots of famous climbers, like they all have the same thing, and I feel like there's sometimes like people think that's like some kind of like singular like thing that they don't want to share, like, oh man, like my kind of like horror stories or the mistakes I made or the really stupid things I did like starting out. But the reality is like so many people start out like that. Like I wish, I had heard exactly what you just said, I totally wish I just like jumped into a course and like found a guide and like a mentor and like gone through that avenue in the beginning, rather than like finding that a little later into climbing. I think it'd be a lot better if that was the norm for people.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no kidding.
I was just climbing at the gym and there's these two really funny like old timers, like pretty darn old timers. Like these guys are like late 60s, 70s, like old guys just having so much fun in the gym and laughing it up and still climbing pretty hard. But they were saying, like they're out at Muir Park the other day and he's like, there was like 3 different parties throughout the day when they were climbing where like he was like, we had to stop to tell him like, if you're going to be continuing doing that, like you're not going to be climbing much longer because like something terrible is going to happen to you. You know what I mean? And so, it is an interesting thread that we've touched on before where it's just like there's climbing is exploding in popularity and exploding as a sport. And you get so many people going from a gym who are like quite physically strong, but then that like actual technical competency or the skills or, descending, those are just things that people just overlook in so many different ways. And I think that we're so hyper focused on like, I need to get stronger, I need to get fitter, I need to get lighter, I need to climb harder. But like, it's so easy to overlook all those other important skills, right?
Oh, for sure.
It's not as glorified, the risk management side of it. And it's not a focus in any sort of, I mean, it's there, but it's almost like, all right, let me do the bare minimum so I can get outside and start sending. So
yeah, totally.
Where are you at kind of right now in terms of your climbing? Do you have any sort of objectives? Where are you focused primarily on? Kind of what grades are you climbing? Just kind of round yourself out presently as a climber.
Yeah. So presently I've worked my way already into a pretty aged trad dad scenario, right? So I'm a huge huge fan of good old 5'9" cracks, right? That's kind of fueling the stoke of where we're at. But I do enjoy the sport climbing. I'm kind of mid 11s with the sport and about low 10s with the trad, right? So I'm still working my way up, and really where it's at is we're just having fun. So
Totally.
I can't say I'm projecting hard or sending hard, but I'm just having a good time.
I think that's just important to share. I think that it can be focused on the grades, but it definitely doesn't define us as a climber. And like you just said, it is all about the fun. But it's important, when people post pictures of someone climbing a route. I mean, they don't post the grade or they don't post the route name. I always get frustrated. I'm just like, why? Like, why are you hiding that information? So
Yeah.
I always love to just kind of get people to understand, like this is the majority of climbers. We aren't all projecting these hard routes. Like that's not what this is about. It's about 5'9" cracks. You could climb that till you die, and you could have an awesome, well, hopefully till your old age when you die, and and you could have an awesome climbing career, and that's what it's all about. So
I think that's a great point, Kyle. And like, for me, like I'm in the exact same boat with you, Quinn. Like I'm trying to break into like deeper into the 10s, and really like my goal in climbing and what I want is like, I want to be able to go on really sweet, sick multi pitches wherever I am around the world. And I want 5'10s to feel like what 5'7", 8", and 5'9" feels like for me now. You know what I mean? Where that's not the reality for me right now. So, but yeah, like that's it. I want to just be able to get out and enjoy amazing places and amazing adventures and obviously improve. But I think, Kyle said it, it's like there's so much hyper focus on just like being the strongest climber and sending and being fixated on grades in a really negative way. And that isn't the reality for people climbing, and I feel like that's the reality. That's what's portrayed in the media, but it isn't the reality of the majority of people climbing. Totally. And nor should it be, right? Like
exactly.
I think you said it. It's about having fun, right? There's that quote. I think it's Alex Lowe. Maybe someone will.
It is. I think it is Alex Lowe.
The audience. Yeah, it's like the best climber is the one having the most fun. And I really try and remind myself of that because there are times where I'm like out there like trying to push for something and I'm not having a good time and I'm like, well, why am I doing this? You know what I mean? Like try and like be in the moment and actually enjoy your day. Go have fun. Go do something like that and go climb. So yeah, it's interesting.
So your path to physiotherapy, what kind of sparked that journey? And was it injury related? Did you have an injury or someone close to you that had an injury that kind of pushed you into that career or inspired you to get into that career, or was it a different path?
Yeah, no, it was injury related, and it wasn't climbing injury related. It was some pretty lame stuff, right? So it was kind of middle school. I twisted real weird, and I still to this day, after all my knowledge and experience, I still don't know how I did it, right? But I basically ended up with 3 open knee surgeries, and that kind of landed me with like a solid year or two of pretty intensive rehabilitation. And so, I had a long exposure to this field and to the discipline of physiotherapy, and it just seemed pretty cool, right? It's a position where we get to kind of help people improve their quality of life, right? So it seemed like a fun way to take my career, and I'm glad I did. The second thing is I started specializing a little bit more in hands as well because I had a pretty significant hand injury. I had 2 fingers cut off on a bandsaw, and those were surgically reattached, and I'm really thankful for that. And they worked just fine at this point. But again, I was back with about another year of rehabilitation, kind of specialized into the hand side of things. So
Holy shit.
Wow, crazy, man. So with the knee, you're just like, were you like playing sports, or you just twisted oddly, like just a little bit, like?
Yeah, no, man. I was in gym class and I twisted, just twisted, and my foot didn't move and my body moved and it wrung my knee out like a towel and it
Oh.
snapped the tip of my femur off. So I must have not have been drinking enough milk at that stage, right?
Oh.
And
It
then I
broke
had
your
like
femur? Your femur broke, you're saying?
my femur broke and my kneecap dislocated. Well, my kneecap dislocated and broke off the femur, a chunk of it. It's pretty
Oh.
gross to think about, but it really kind of wrung the knee out like a towel. And
Yeah.
it's yeah.
Yeah, brutal, man. 3 surgeries, like that's just a lot to go through, man. So taxing on the body, such like a long thing to like get and progress through. And especially it's like you're young, you're athletic, you've got to do school, like there's all these things, right? It's such a like just on itself, if you had nothing to do in life, just going through that is just like such a monumental thing to get through, right?
Oh yeah.
So can I call you Tommy Caldwell 2.0 for cutting your fingers off with a
Exactly,
bandsaw?
exactly.
Did you get better at climbing after you cut your fingers off? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, see, I got mine back on, so I don't really have any.
See, if you had left them off, man, you'd be like 5'15" by now. I think that's how it works.
Must be right, eh?
What fingers were it on what hand?
It was the middle finger and the ring finger on the right.
Wow.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right at the knuckle in the middle.
Oh, did it go through the joint,
right
above
through
or
the
below
center.
the joint?
Right
through
through
the
the joint.
center.
Yeah.
How old were you?
I think I was about 14.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I was in shop class.
Yeah, man. In shop class at school. Wow. I'm just like, I'm feeling so bad for your teacher. You know what I mean?
I know.
As he just has to like turn around and have some kids like fingers flying across the room. Like the worst nightmare, you know?
Yeah. Right.
Wow, man.
What a crazy story.
Totally. Yeah. So brutal. Really, really interesting. Totally unfortunate for you, you know, although I'm sure like, you know, like Kyle and I have kind of learned like, obviously having injuries sucks, but you can't change things that are out of your control. But you can try and look at like the positive side of things. And like, I've learned a lot about myself, like mentally, physically, you know, through this process and like what I can actually deal with and overcoming through adversity and changing expectations and, you know, learning to just accept things. And there's just been so many things that like, obviously in the long run, I wish it hadn't happened. But you know, it's not all negative that it did happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, right. No, it definitely gives you an appreciation as well for being able to empathize with patients, right?
I could imagine for you. Like, trust me, been there. You're gonna be okay.
Yeah, having that stuff happen to you at such a young age, I'm sure had a huge impact on your growth and development, cognitively and probably empathetically as well. It's definitely interesting. I personally haven't heard of many stories of someone so young going through such traumatic injuries so early on. What do you feel like the biggest lessons you learned at a younger age during that time of development? Like what were your biggest takeaways from kind of being in those shoes?
Probably not to put my fingers in a bandsaw, to be honest. I don't know if I learned much, man. I just did my best and got through it, and you know, fingers. It's certainly I don't have any limitations on the fingers anymore. I kind of stuck with my rehab, and we got back to where I wanted to be. So I don't know.
What's your knee like?
The knee, you know, the knee could be better. I won't lie with that. And partially that was my fault. I was quite young. I think I was 13 then. But the knee, I didn't take it seriously. I kind of slacked off a little bit, and it's definitely given me some grief to this day for sure.
Are you like potential like higher case for arthritis? Are you looking at a knee replacement? What's kind of like the long-term outcome, do you think, for your knee?
For sure, yeah. So when that surgery was done, I was basically told that I'd have arthritis before I was 20, right, sort of thing. So where it's kind of at is I'm certain if you went and took an X-ray of my knee, I wouldn't want to see it. We'll say it like that. So I'm sure there's already some good degenerative changes, and you know, it flares up time and time, but really, you know, I can still do 2,000 meter days in the hills. I can still run downhill. I can still jog. So I'm I'm pretty stoked for where it's at, but I'm sure it as age kind of takes its toll that I will be looking at a knee replacement closer to the 40 years old line.
Yeah, I'm probably looking at an ankle replacement in one ankle and arthritis like early on in life and stuff. And so, like part of like the ignorant side of my brain is just like praying for like technology and innovation. I'm just like, all right, we need Elon to just make like a full 180 and start doing like joint replacements or something, But I don't know how safe of a bet that is. But I am kind of hopeful. I'm like, where could joint replacement and orthopedics go in the next 20 years? Where can stem cells and those applications go, or stem cell grafting? But ultimately, like banking on that's not really a good one. That's just like pipe dreaming in the back of my mind. Like that would be really interesting and cool, and I'm hopeful. But at the end of the day, like it's probably not what you want to rely on, right?
Yeah, is ankle replacement even a thing?
Oh yeah, they can replace the ankle and stuff. They can fuse the ankle. It really depends, but I don't think it's pleasant, to say the least. Like definitely very last case scenarios, right? For those things, in my rudimentary understanding and looking at them. But I was reading a couple like studies a while back about stem cell grafting. So they were talking about using some kind of like an organic material, and they go in the joint, and the material is like infused or injected with stem cells, and then they put that over the degenerative tissue, and hopefully like that the goal is to have that be able to grow into new tissue. But I think they're very far away from that happening.
That's kind of what I was going to say is I don't think it's the tech's there yet, but the idea is definitely out there at this point.
Maybe just like we could talk as if like someone like a listener who maybe does have an injury, or they don't know, like, why would I go to a physiotherapist over a massage therapist or something? So, maybe if you could go over a little bit about that, of like what separates physiotherapy, and when does someone want to seek like a medical professional in physiotherapy?
Oh, totally. Okay. No, this is a really good question, because a lot of people don't really know. I don't think it's out there very well that physios are kind of primary care practitioners. And so what that means is essentially we're trained with the same skills to kind of assess and diagnose and treat and make sure that we're screening out red flags and know when to refer. So you don't need a doctor's referral to go to physio. You don't need essentially to see a doctor or see anyone before going to physio. You can kind of just go in with whatever ache, pain, problem that you have and see them. Where the evidence is kind of pointing is that you always want to take more of an active approach to your rehabilitation. So like massage and stuff feels great, right? And if you like it, whatever. But if it's like something that is interfering with walks of life, and like it's really starting to debilitate you with activities, that's where I'd start to go towards physio, right? And it's where I would say don't come to us is like if you just cratered and broke both your ankles, like you go to the hospital, right? Like that's I don't know. I'm going to send you there anyway, right? So there's a little bit of still that, but where we do get a lot of people is they still go towards their medical doctor for when they have kind of general musculoskeletal aches and pains. And it's just interesting because we get about the same amount of education on pharmacological management as a primary care physician will get on MSK care, which is about 2 to 3 weeks, right? So they don't really learn much about the body, and we don't really learn much about meds. So where a lot of people kind of, I think there's a bit of time wasted is having to go and get that referral. So like I would say if you're struggling, like go and see a physio, right? That would probably be your first and foremost thing. And then if you need it, they'll make the referral to the given specialties that will help you. And there is on top of that, there is I might have to find this study and the reference for it, but it was analyzing kind of care delivered with ankle sprains, kind of primary care ankle sprains, and what was the advice given in the emergency room if you went just with an uncomplicated ankle sprain, right? And it was not 95% of the time people were given advice that was not concurrent with the current guidelines of rehab. And that's like an extraordinary number. And what ends up happening is you have about 30% of people who follow just this guideline and this advice, or follow the advice that they're given in the emergency room. They end up with pain a year later, which is completely unacceptable with an ankle sprain, right? It's a more or less a simple injury. And it's just like people set themselves back really far just because they sought out the care that they think they need. And it turns out it just wasn't the appropriate type of care.
Is there any sort of specialization, or kind of like, how would you describe your particular career right now? Like, do you have any focuses, specializations, or kind of like, where's your area of expertise?
Yeah, I've started to branch out more into the concussion and vestibular side of physiotherapy, and it's kind of drawn me to it because it's different. It's got a lot more a variety to it. So the concussion side of things is kind of it's a sprouting field of rehabilitation where we're starting to realize that people with concussions actually do quite well if they're rehabilitated with kind of the proper style of rehab. And that really is individually tailored to whatever systems they kind of have affected in their concussion. But with our traditional management of concussion, we just kind of told people to sit in a dark room and rest there until their symptoms went away, right? And it's the same as if you told someone with an ankle sprain to stay on crutches for the next 4 weeks, right? It kind of leads you into this state of deconditioning and state of underloading where it's easier to flare you up. And then people get really stuck in that kind of trench cycle with concussions, where the same thing, it's kind of just, it needs a little bit of that kind of coaxed rehabilitation to bring you out of that. So that's kind of the concussion side of things that I'm doing. And then the vestibular is treating more of that vertigo. And so that's kind of like the dizziness and the rotational impairments that people can get, from trauma, from whiplash. They can even get it kind of insidious, just coming out of nowhere. Like, it doesn't really have to have a start. But the thing that draws me to that is got a very algorithmic style approach. Like the inner ear doesn't lie. It'll kind of make your eyes do some funky things. And based on whatever your eyes are doing, it's something sometimes that we can treat in the same session. And it's the closest thing to wizardry that you can do with my degree. So I'm kind of taking that side of this rehab.
I was not actually familiar with the word vestibular, and I had to look it up when I was looking at your bio and stuff. And so is it all oriented from the eardrum? Because I know that has to do with orienting balance in your body and stuff like that. Is that what will actually drive the mechanism for vertigo?
Yeah. So what vertigo essentially is it's a mismatch in your body's awareness of its position in space. And so there's kind of three main sources of where we get that information from. One is our inner ear. So this is kind of the semicircular canals, and that little vestibular apparatus that changes in your head position will kind of relay information to your brain. The second is our eyeballs. So our eyes' ability to kind of visually process and orient us with our surroundings. And the third is our kind of proprioception. So what is that? That's kind of like our position sense, our muscles and joints. So those kind of relay a specific message to the brain about where your body is in space. And really, a mismatch in any of those three systems will create a sense of dizziness in your environment. That rotational dizziness that typically stems from the inner ear, you can have about more rare cases. Obviously, it's coming from the brain and the central nervous system with stuff more severe like strokes. But for the vast majority of cases, it is kind of an inner ear impairment or one of the two other systems.
Yeah, I was actually just talking with my, she's kind of like my second mother in a way. But her name's Linda, and she was saying she just woke up one day and was had total vertigo, and it was out of nowhere from no head injury or anything. And she went and she got checked out, and the person said yeah, it's vertigo. So what would bring that about if there was no initial trauma or anything like that? I'm just curious. Maybe obviously it's you can't diagnose someone without looking at them, but
yeah. So you know what? That's a really good question. And sometimes there's absolutely nothing. So really there is different medications, or there's you could be sick and have that infection kind of attack the inner ear, or have that inflammation kind of affect that nerve that comes from the inner ear. But sometimes people just wake up with it, and that's the vast majority of cases I see that I treat are people who've really just kind of woken up with this kind of, we call it benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, but it's just those kind of crystals in your inner ear that are for whatever reason they came dislodged, and they're just interrupting the fluid flow. So that's the most common case of that sort of thing. And then that's closely followed by an infection. That's vestibular neuritis is kind of the next one that people get.
Is it normally correlated with age?
It is, yeah. The older you get, the more likely it is that this happens. And there's some working theories. Some people think that the kind of jelly that the crystals sit on gets a little bit stiffer and less viscous with age, and it's easier to fall off. But realistically, we don't know, right? So
What's this? Sorry, what's the crystal you're talking about?
Yeah, so if you break open that vestibular apparatus inside our inner ear, which is about it's really really tiny. It's inside. You've kind of got these hairs, and the direction of those hairs as they flow in space is what relays that position sense to your brain. And on top of the hairs is a jelly substance, and on top of those jelly substance is little crystals called otoliths. And so those are actually as you turn left and right, those are what sway so that the hair cells are fired. So it's a pretty wild system, and it doesn't have much room for error. So you can imagine the very small impairment leads to pretty drastic changes.
Wow.
Wow, super fascinating, man.
I'm like turning my head, trying to feel my crystals in my ears.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that crystals for healing are real.
That's not what I said.
Let me just pull out my moon water and yeah, I mean, no, sorry to joke at all the people who believe in star signs and crystal healing, but
I try not to say crystals with patients because they give you that look sideways, right? So I would say otoliths so that we're not confused with some sort of astrology dealers.
So earlier on, you were mentioning about concussions, and obviously we're talking about vertigo and stuff and your specialization, so I think that's probably a really great way to segue into there. And so you're saying like previously, because I've heard that as well too, what you said, which is like, okay, you've got a concussion. I've had friends who've had them and they recommended like, okay, like dark light, like dark room, no blue light, stay in a dark place, just rest. That I've heard that before from friends who've had concussions. So what has changed? Like, what is more modern best practice? What has changed in dealing with concussion?
Yeah, basically everything, right? So it's very similar to kind of all other styles of MSK management, where what we're recommending now, like it really used to be the traditional management was you sit in a dark room until you have symptoms. If you come out, you have symptoms, you go back into your dark room, right?
Yeah.
What we're starting to recommend now is you have a brief period of rest. So that's 24 to 48 hours without any visual input. And that really is kind of like you're reducing your screen time. You're not reading. You're not doing this, that, the other thing. You're kind of just chilling. But after that brief period of rest, which is about that 48 hours, now we're going to start gradually exposing you back into activities. And we're going to start getting you doing a little bit of aerobic exercise, because truly the brain is like any of the other systems, that it will become sensitized if it's not exposed. And so we run into that problem where people get into what we call the trench, where it's they don't have the conditioning to sustain the daily activities that they want to, and so they flare up, and then their vice is to go and lie in the dark room until it goes away. But the thing is that doesn't give you any capacity. It doesn't give you any tolerance for activities of life, and so you almost become a little bit less tolerant to what you were before, and then you're going to flare up easier, and then you go back and you lie in your dark room. And that's unfortunately what stems a lot of those you can call them post-concussion syndromes or persistent concussion symptoms, is really improper management of the syndrome, right?
Wow, that's crazy.
Wow, fascinating, man.
I'm not too familiar. I know there's like minor and severe. Like, can you break down like the varying degrees of kind of the severity of a concussion?
Oh, for sure. So that's the funny thing too, is we used to kind of grade them kind of grades 1 through 3, right? Where it's kind of mild, moderate, severe. And again, we've kind of scrapped that. So it's we're kind of shaking up the playing field with this, but it's because we can't forecast the severity of a concussion until it's recovered. So we can look back retrospectively and say, oh, you probably had a mild concussion, but it's very difficult to actually say what the grade of concussion someone has based on your assessment, because they take basically a different course depending on kind of the treatment, the management, and the style of practice that they sought after. There's a couple negative prognostic factors, and what that means is essentially we can probably say with reasonable certainty that your concussion is going to last more than 30 days if you kind of have a history of migraines, if you have a sensation of fogginess that lasts more than 3 days, if you have kind of a direct strike to the occiput or back of the head, or a rotational impact, or if you kind of had insomnia or depression before this, or more than 2 concussions in the past. Those are kind of our red flag, or pink flags, I should say, where we're kind of saying, okay, this person might have a little bit more severe of a head impact. But it's really, really tough to actually say Is this mild, moderate, or severe, without looking back after they've healed to assess it? Because really, sometimes even the concussion symptoms are delayed. They don't necessarily have to come on right at the start. They can kind of come on as it progresses and how the injury presents.
Is there a particular side of the head that's more dangerous to have an impact for a concussion?
Yeah, so we typically see a pretty nastier symptoms with the occiput. So this is back of the head. The back of the head is tends to be where we get a little bit more of a nasty presentation, as well as temporal strikes, and the reason for that is the rotational impact of getting hit kind of on the temple. That's kind of where we also see a little bit more of a longer presentation and more severe symptoms.
Is that just because it's like, I mean, I might be super ignorant here, but isn't there like you're closer to your brain at this point here? There's not as much barrier as there is later in the skull, or is that totally wrong?
It's more so I guess I kind of have to speak to the pathophysiology of a concussion. It's a concussion essentially is a diffuse axon shearing, so that the brain kind of stretches a bit. It doesn't kind of slap the skull back and forth like we used to think, right? That counter-coup injury was a popular topic in the mid 2000s there. It doesn't kind of slap the skull back and forth. What it does though is it kind of shears. So you kind of stretch the brain and you stretch the axons a little bit. And that stretching of the axon basically results in a widespread excitation of the brain. So what ends up happening is you have all these ions that were released, and how the brain responds to that is it has to kind of pump all the ions back into the right place so you can kind of get on with your life. And how it does that is it uses ATP, or it uses energy. And so you have this widespread energy crisis essentially. So your brain just blasts through energy, and so you kind of dump energy, and so you end up sitting at your brain's trying to operate at 100%, but you only have 50% in the tank. You're running on fumes at all times, and that temporal impact results in a bit more of a rotational force, which results in more shearing. That's the more problematic side of that one.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Super fascinating, man. Wow. It's just, that info is so cool, man. I'm just so stoked to be having this conversation with you. That's wild. Yeah. So I mean, obviously this is going to be a tough one because it'd be based on like, severity of, like you're saying, the amount of shearing and stuff like that. And depending on where you're struck. So, but like, do you have like an average, like, general spectrum of like, okay, if you have a concussion, you could be dealing with this. And let's say first concussion, your healing time could be like X. Like, is there something like a general guideline like that?
Yeah, something like that. So really, like, I think the word concussion doesn't strike fear into people's hearts enough as it should. But it truly is a mild traumatic brain injury. Like it is a severe incident. So if you could, not sustain a single concussion, it would be great, right? So it's hard to say just how severe that impact. Oh, I forgot the question. Hit me again.
Yeah, it's just like healing time process. Like, are you looking at like 2 months, 3 years? Like,
yeah. Okay, so physiologically, and this doesn't mean the absence of symptoms. This means kind of the brain has sucked itself back to the point where it was before. Kind of it's gotten the energy back to where it wants to. For adults, is about 2 weeks, and for adolescents, is about 4 weeks. So right around kind of the 3-week mark for your first concussion, we tend to expect symptoms to be pretty well. And obviously, if it's a little bit more severe, then we go into that 4-week mark plus, which is more that persistent concussion signs. But that physiological healing time is kind of over by around 2 weeks, and the rest is just the symptoms. But if you were to sustain a second concussion within that first period of healing, the second concussion is going to last 3 times as long at minimum that the first did. So it's kind of like if you get 2 strikes in a row, you're really setting yourself back quite a ways. And then obviously there's that second impact syndrome, which you might have heard of, where Rowan's law has come in, and this was essentially a kid who sustained 2 concussions kind of back to back and didn't tell anyone, and it was fatal. So it can be quite severe, and that's why it's quite important that when if you're in doubt in terms of play or whatever, that you really sit that athlete out.
What about like friends I've heard where it's like a year later they're still experiencing concussion syndromes and like like things like what? So is that common, uncommon? What do you think's going on there?
So a year's pretty nasty, but it is. I do see a lot of patients who sustain symptoms for more than a month, and essentially what it boils down to is that that persistent concussion signs, and this is where my job comes in, is to kind of identify why those are there, and those can be driven by a number of different symptoms, right? So typically, about 90% of the time, concussions manifest in oculomotor deficits. So, kind of the eyes aren't working as well as they should have. They're not kind of relaying the information to the brain as well as they should have. But then also, you get run into symptoms like cervicogenics, or kind of neck-driven concussion symptoms. You run into vestibular-driven concussion symptoms. You can run into autonomic, so kind of your body's flight and flight driven concussion symptoms. And you can even run into like sleep impairments and all these things that create a longer lasting concussion. And that's kind of where we jump in is after that kind of 2 week mark. If people are still struggling, that's where we kind of come in to try and identify what's actually driving these symptoms and where you need to tailor your rehab to kind of deal with it.
Wow, super cool. I mean, not cool if you're going through it, but but fascinating in general, like you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure.
My immediate thought on recovery is goes to nutrition. We hear that, fat intake is really good for the brain. It's super healthy for the brain. Would you say that after a concussion that upping your fat intake would help and speed up the healing process for the brain and returning the energy to
for sure.
the axons?
Yeah, like our recommendations are kind of like you're upping your omega-3 intake to about 3 to 4 grams a day. On top of that, you're also taking vitamin D. You're trying to drink a lot of water because your brain kind of loses its ability to regulate kind of hydration as well sometimes. So people run into getting really dehydrated in those initial stages. So yes, nutrition is huge, and we kind of, when we see a patient on the first time, we hand out a guideline of foods that we kind of want them consuming, as well as kind of activities and behaviors we want them to partake in for the next couple of weeks.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, Quinn, but for the omega-3, it's DHA particularly is better for the brain. Is that correct? Or is it just in general EPA and DHA?
That's a good question. I wouldn't know, but I could look into that.
Okay. Yeah. I've just heard that like DHA has a bigger effect for like your eyes and your brain. So I, take it at a grain of sand, but yeah, I definitely want to read a study on that. But I was wondering if you knew. What about someone dealing with, obviously not, I forget the name of the kid you were talking about with where he was fatal, but what about repetitive concussions? You hear of like, whatever professional athlete, if you've received a concussion and then a year later you get a concussion, and then, at what point is it like you're risking, like serious health side effects, for life kind of thing?
Yeah.
How is that going to affect you?
It's tough to say. Like, it could really just be one. Like, that's it. It doesn't have to be necessarily a cumulative effect, though there is a cumulative effect. You become a lot more sensitive and a lot easier to concuss, and the severity of your symptoms definitely increases. But some people are doing pretty poorly after one concussion. And that also just it's a bit of a complicated realm, because the psychosocial side of things also plays into the length and duration and severity of a concussion. So it is a really tough realm, but I would say if you could go about not having a concussion, that would be better than one. It would be much better than two. But yes, there is that kind of cumulative effect where symptoms start to add up.
Interesting. And so earlier you were mentioning that, like, I think it was depression you were saying. So like if you've dealt with like, let's say chronic depression your entire life, is that going to affect the outcome of the concussion generally? Is that something you see?
It absolutely will. Yeah, that's kind of one of our biggest negative prognostic risk factors. And all that basically tells us is that we can be reasonably confident that you'll have symptoms that last longer than 30 days.
Wow.
So, and do you know any like mechanism or reasoning for that? Is that to do with like serotonin, dopamine? It's kind of unknown, but we just know that they're related?
Yeah, I'm sure there is. I wouldn't say that I know enough about it to speak to it, but yes, I would assume there is that relationship between the two. But yes, we just kind of look at it more as a risk factor that we identify and that we make sure that it's kind of factored into the treatment plan.
Are there any diseases or other mental conditions besides depression that are also precursors, just like this depression?
Anxiety as well. That's the big one as well, kind of anxiety and depression. But I don't know enough about, schizophrenia or anything like that, or if
Hmm.
there's been a link established between any of that at this stage.
I'm just writing down never get a concussion.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
I've dealt with like depression and anxiety for a lot of years. Like anxiety not as bad, but a lot of like chronic depression runs in my family as well too and stuff. And so, not that I was planning on getting one beforehand, but yeah, you're motivating me here.
I'm just curious to dive this a little deeper into age differences. So, like, is there an age period in our cognitive development where concussions are the most risk creating versus maybe later in life? Like, is there a disparity in those age groups? And when like you're like, all right, age 9 through 14, like do not get a concussion. Like, is there some sort of correlation there?
Yeah, the younger ages as your brain is developing is a really good time to try and avoid knocking it, and that's just due to the large scale developmental changes, and also how it kind of correlates with a longer physiological recovery. Lets us know that that'd be a good age, really, anytime before, Yeah, I would we say adolescence, so I'm going to say anytime before age 20 would be an awesome time, and really anytime after would also be okay, not to sustain one. But certainly those years of development are pretty critical, and kids bounce back pretty okay, but at the same time, it's you don't want to be mucking around getting multiple concussions as you're developing.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty common with like sports these days and football, especially. You've got kids, playing football in middle school and just like slamming into each other and getting concussions left and right. So it's interesting how common it is, and I think how overlooked it is in a lot of these team sports.
For sure. I think also like, the long-term implications, right? Like, I believe lots of studies have been coming out now and it's like well established, just like NFL players, particularly just people who've had repetitive impacts to their head. Do you know the name? What is it? It's
Yeah,
like your
chronic
brain.
traumatic encephalopathy. So it's
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Take
Yeah. It's
that.
like associated with like violence, early death, like
yeah. Wow.
rage, like,
Yeah.
like pre-Alzheimer's, like just all these things. It's like obviously
Wow.
quite terrible, I think a
Wow.
pretty good sign that you don't want to go around banging your head a whole
Yeah.
bunch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense.
Really, any loss of consciousness is a very severe event, and concussions only 10% of the time you lose consciousness. So like
Yeah.
if you're knocked out for 8 minutes, you've probably got some pretty severe deficits waking up. If
Yeah.
you do, that is. It's
Yeah. If you do, yeah, that's a good caveat. Yeah. One day maybe we'll have to climb together, Quinn, and then
Yeah.
we can go rate concussions in Hollywood movies.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of the closest thing I had to a concussion when I was a kid. I was snowboarding and I went off a jump and just no helmet and just like slapped the back of my head on the hard ice. And I didn't lose consciousness, but I lost my vision. I went completely black for, I
Yeah,
don't
there
know,
you go.
probably like 30 seconds to 60 seconds. And it took me a solid like 35, 45 minutes till my vision was completely back. I was like really fuzzy and really blurry for quite some time.
Yeah, again, that's occiput, right? That's that
Yeah.
the vision center is kind of back there. So is kind of our fine-tuned coordination center. Is kind of our cerebellum. So there's a lot of important stuff back there.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's if your vision went like that, you most certainly had a concussion.
Yeah, I was on this like dock that was swaying, like people were going side to side, like moving. It was like a floating dock in like Rainbow Lake in Whistler or whatever. And like when I was really young and somebody fell on my head, and like that was probably the hardest
Oh.
impact I've ever had. And like I didn't like black out or anything, but I just remember being pretty messed up. I was pretty young too, so I don't know if I had a concussion or not, but like that was the hardest impact I've ever had in my head. So, but I feel like besides that, nothing too crazy.
That's good.
Although I did Thai box for like 3 years, and I'm sure that wasn't good for me.
Oh man.
Yeah, what's the medical diagnosis? Thai boxing good for the brain? Bad?
No comment.
Yeah, no comment. Exactly. Yeah, I plead the fifth. Yeah, I guess for me, like I don't know, anything else to add on concussions here, Kyle?
Yeah, I guess just like circling this back around to climbing. I guess I have two questions here. First one's going to be pretty easy, and I'll just link it to the second one. First one is, I guess I'll just start with the first one. Helmets. This might be a dumb question. Do they help against concussions? And if so, why? Like the physics behind it. Like how does it protect your brain from this shearing?
Yeah, good question. So yes, helmets for sure. And it really kind of gives me nervous seeing people climb without helmets, just because it really doesn't take much, and it could be by accident to get that rope behind your leg and flip you upside down. And really it's force over time is the big thing of why a helmet will help you is it reduces the amount, or it increases the amount of time, kind of the crumple space that it takes for that force to be dissipated. And if you can increase that amount of time, you get less force through your skull and less shearing as a result. And if you really, you really want to be fancy, the MIPS technology is an excellent feature that climbing helmets are starting to incorporate. I think the BD Vision and the Mammut Wall Rider and the Norwand all kind of have this technology, and it basically acts by emulating the cerebrospinal fluid you have around your brain. It kind of gives you an extra layer of friction, so it reduces how much that rotational force has on your skull. And really, again, that rotational force is kind of what can create more dramatic concussion symptoms. So stack the cards in your favor. Like wear a helmet. It really isn't worth it for what can kind of occur even with simple falls.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it's funny. I worked at a mech for quite a few years. I recently just quit in May. And not a lot of climbers willing to buy MIPS in their helmets. But a lot of bikers were like, no problem, they'll buy MIPS, but climbers, but I'd be interested to see. I think that's going to change over the next little while.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that's an interesting one that you're talking about, the rope tangling your legs. I think a lot of people don't think about that. They think like, oh, like how am I going to, I'm not going to hit my head, or
if I get hit by a rock, I'm going to die anyway.
Yeah, that's a possibility. But yeah, I think that is a really interesting thing, and something that probably not a lot of people are thinking about as much.
The number of people I see crack climbing without helmets, right? Like the rope is perpetually behind your legs. That's where it sits, right? It's kind of impossible to keep it in a place that would result in a clean fall a lot of the time. So if there's a take home, I would definitely endorse the helmet use.
Yeah. Have you seen any particular climbing climbing related head injuries, maybe concussions, that either you have dealt with or a colleague?
Yeah, I actually caught a buddy's fall who got his leg trapped behind the rope there, and he flipped upside down and smacked his head and then broke the helmet, but he was fine. So it again kind of solidifies that notion that you should be wearing a good helmet, right? And this is not on terrain that I would deem threatening, but it was enough that really it could have turned into a bad situation.
Wow.
Yeah, I've told this story before. I think earlier on in our episodes, but a friend of mine, David, he was climbing with another buddy, Terry, and it was like Cypress Falls, super easy, chill climbing, and a rock dislodged and smashed Terry on the head and just deflected, totally fine, had a helmet on, And then another buddy of mine, Nathan, he was belaying and he got a small rock in his face or something, and his head was just bleeding profusely. And it was I wasn't there for this, but he's holding on, and it's yeah, man, pretty unsuspecting, easy places. And it's a big deal. It's really easy to just overlook. And also from a safety standpoint, if your belayer's not wearing a helmet and they're not on a gree-gree, it's man, they just get knocked in the head or concussed or something. It's boom, man,
you're free soloing.
Yeah, totally. You probably want to think about that, as a hazard, so yeah, it's so easy to overlook.
And it's interesting because it's much more of a risk than the blunt force trauma. You could die from blunt force trauma, but you could also have these lasting effects from a concussion too, that I don't think a lot of people are taking into consideration.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of top rope soloing lately, and I actually haven't been wearing a helmet for that. But in my own defense, I know the route. It's usually pretty vertical. There's no loose rock. And then it's because I have traction devices on, my fall is 0 feet, if I fall. So I feel like it's not possible to like whip my head. It would have to be from a rock falling on me.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I don't know.
There is something freeing about not wearing it.
There is, you know, I didn't
yeah.
used to not enjoy it, but now I kind of do, you know? So yeah, I think the exception though is like if you can climb like, you know, 13 plus and it's like this massive overhanging roof and it's like physically impossible for you to fall and get your like leg caught in the rope, then it's like, all right, you probably have a pretty good case there to be like, you got a clean fall, you know? Just like I don't wear a climbing helmet when I go to the gym, like climb base 5, you know what I mean? It's like, I'm like, no rock, everything's super vertical, I'm good. Like,
yeah.
So, but yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty funny though, if you saw somebody in the gym with a climbing helmet on, you know?
I'd respect it, yeah.
He's got like 20 quick draws and like full rack.
I think Cody Bradford even alluded to wearing a helmet in the gym. I think in our episode, he kind of alluded to it. He's like, if you're, I wouldn't talk down on it, because things can happen.
Yeah, no, totally.
But yeah, I mean, Max, for me, that's good on concussions. How about you?
Yeah, no, I think we got so much awesome stuff there. That was like really fascinating and really cool. And I also just like love when I'm like diving through stuff like that and just learning tons. And then also it's like, hey, like if someone in the future ever has a concussion, I can just like reference them to like, come listen to Quinn here for a little bit. It's pretty cool. It's super sweet. So definitely. Yeah, I love doing this stuff, man. I guess like moving on here then, just a question we had is like, maybe you could just talk about like an evidence-based approach to physiotherapy and like what that is. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I would say that's a loaded question, but it's something that, I think needs to be talked about because it's kind of tough for a field that has so much literature coming out, every single day and week and month and year, that it's really difficult to actually stay up with the literature. If you're doing nothing but reading articles, you might be able to do okay, but kind of the general practice of physiotherapy is in my mind been evolving from kind of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s from like a very passive standpoint into more of like an active evidence-based rehabilitation, which is where we're kind of taking the best available evidence that we have and synthesizing a treatment plan and a practice approach that resides within that boundary. So we're kind of trying our best to take a critical look at what actually works, not just based on our anecdotes, and what doesn't, and trying to kind of wean out the fluff, I would say. And there's a lot of fluff.
Empirical, essentially, right?
Yeah.
It's like you're just having a reason behind it, and it's like a logical, linear kind of progress, ideally, or at least that's the way I'm conceptualizing and thinking about it.
The tough bit too is it takes on average about 21 years for research to translate into clinical practice. So even a lot of the stuff that came out in 2013, which is pretty critical, methods of treating soft tissue injuries it's still lagging behind. So, I think as a profession, we still have a lot of room to go, but I think most of us are trying our best to kind of stay on top of it and translate that evidence that we do have into how we treat patients and how we kind of perform our practice.
In regards to those soft tissue injuries, is there anything that you can think of that stands out that maybe isn't like fully adopted in physiotherapy today? That's like a difference.
100%. Yeah. I'm sure most people are familiar with the RICE concept, kind of rest, ice, compress, elevate. Yeah, we scrapped it, right? It turns out it actually kind of turns injuries a little bit more chronic a lot of the time than it does help. And it's been replaced. I think this is the British Journal of Sports Medicine in 2013. With peace and love. So it's a less, it takes a little bit more out of that acronym, but we're kind of going on the idea of protecting for about a 48-hour time frame, really not pushing anymore. We're going for kind of a resting for about a 48-hour time frame where we're not kind of going outside of pain. We're giving this tissue a break for about 48 hours. And then again, we're starting to gradually load it. Or protecting it, and you can elevate it, you can compress it. It doesn't seem to make much of a difference. But then that education piece. So we're really trying to push people away from seeking out passive care, seeking out TENS, ultrasound, needless imaging, needless X-rays, needless imaging investigations and really just letting the body do its thing. And then we're starting to move as well away from icing. So we're really starting to recommend that we don't ice and we don't consume anti-inflammatories, which is kind of, if you were to go to the hospital and say you had an ankle sprain, I can bet you 10 times out of 10 that they're going to give you anti-inflammatories, ice, and tell you to rest, right? So that's peace and love is, and I think this would even be worth including a reference in there, is kind of our newer management strategy for soft tissue injuries. And it comes as well with that love side of things, which is load optimization, vascularization, so kind of pain-free cardiovascular activity as much as you can do, and then exercise, which is kind of where physio comes into the equation on that one.
So real quick, it sounds, peace and loves, they're both acronyms. Am I correct?
Yeah.
So I got protect, education. What's A? Avoid anti-inflammatories.
Yeah, you got protection, rest, and that's going to be for protect, elevate. Let me get out here. Okay, protect, elevate, avoid anti-inflammatories, compression, education, and then the love is load, optimism, vascularization, and exercise. So it's loaded. But yeah,
I like it. I like it a lot. I really like the education piece to it. I think it's so important. I think that when we go through injuries like this, a lot of us don't really have a lot of education about our own bodies. Maybe we don't know how to move. We don't know our own muscular structure and how our body is moving around this world. And I think that when we do get into these situations, healthcare providers and people like you have such an awesome opportunity to teach people about their body, to educate them about what's going on physically. People are smart. People want to know, for the most part, people want to know what's going on. And I think if you have this honest conversation with them and try to get them to understand what's actually happening, there's going to be a lot of benefit moving forward. And I think that, like you said, it seems like in the past, it's just like, here's some anti-inflammatories, go rest in ice. And like, that's it. They wash their hands and they move on. And there's just this huge opportunity that's missed. So it's really cool that this is the new acumen. I'm down with it.
Yeah, no, man, super cool. And I think really needed for people to know, obviously, right? So I'm sure there's obviously caveats to that, like that pertains to a certain specific like type or the more common like repetitive or strain injuries. Like obviously if you get out of surgery or something, like I'm gonna pop a few Tylenol, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's our recommendations for soft tissue, for acute soft tissue injury management. So that would be like a ankle sprain, that would be like a muscle strain or something like on that forefront.
I feel like a common thread here, and whether it's for concussions or anything, is like, unless it's like severe like trauma where you're like getting surgery or something's like really, really damaged and traumatic, it's kind of like active recovery, right? It's like, that just sitting around doing nothing, not using it, not pumping like fluid or blood or lymph into the area, not moving it, trying to suppress that inflammation that's doing healing, like all that kind of stuff, whether you're doing it in a dark room with a concussion or just sitting on the couch doing nothing for a week straight with your ankle up in the air, it's just bad for you.
Yeah, motion's lotion is what we like to say. And that really pertains to most of all injuries.
I love that saying. Motion is lotion, man. I dig it. I gotta start saying that more. Well, I mean, I feel like this is a great, motion is lotion is a great segue into like asking you about like, maybe if you can just speak of like some common injuries maybe that you treat in the I guess anything more relevant to the climbing community or the skiing community, that kind of stuff. Like, what are common injuries you see?
Oh, for sure. So yeah, if we're talking climbing, it's classic shoulders and pulleys. That's what I get nonstop. That's really seems to be a common climbing injury. The boulderers tend to get a little bit more wrist action. I see a lot of kind of TFCC tears, so kind of tears on the inside of the kind of pinky side of the wrist. We have a lot of injuries that go on that side, and that's just more from kind of forceful, dynamic, high velocity movements can kind of create some damage to that area. If we're looking at skiing, I see a lot of ACLs. That's a huge one with skiers, and then we also kind of have our muscle strains that go through all realms of the body with any climber or skiers. That's really, really common.
Yeah, man, super cool. And so if we could just focus on maybe like shoulders and pulleys, since I think that pertains to our community the most, like what's the mechanism, what's the outcome looking like, general healing times and stuff like that. And maybe, I don't know, like if same thing with like a concussion, like if there's degrees to a shoulder, like whether it's a dislocation or stuff like that, if you can just kind of touch on those things, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so if we go with the pulleys first, the mechanism of injury really is it's forced extension of the tip of your finger with a flexed middle finger joint. And so really the thing about it is a pulley can sustain an enormous amount of force, kind of close to 800 to 1,000 newtons. And so it really has to be either a not warmed up, undertrained, or underprepared for the situation. It has to be a very dependent grip type. It has to be kind of a closed crimp is typically where we'll see these problems, and it has to be feet blowing. So it needs to almost be a very dynamic movement, or almost dynoing off a crimp is where we see this issue come. But when you really break it down, it breaks down into the loading and the progressive nature of the mechanical stress that you've placed on your tissue, and if you've exceeded it. And so that really is it. So if you're looking to, I'll even just speak very, very quickly to the pulley side of things. If you're looking to prevent a pulley injury, you got to warm up, you got to progressively load them, and you got to really work on all your hand grips so you have kind of a vast array of tools at your disposal and not just a more passive crimp position to utilize. And that's kind of the big thing with pulleys is that's the big three, I would say, with those. Shoulders on that forefront, we see a lot of rotator cuff injuries. So that's and bicep lesions, and that's kind of some people might consider that part of the rotator cuff, but just our shoulder stabilizers. There's a lot of outward rotational force when you're climbing, and a lot of the climbers I assess have very, very weak rotator cuffs. So essentially, this is the muscles that hold your shoulder or your arm bone into your shoulder blade. They have they have really powerful lats. They have very powerful, impressive traps, and all these muscles that are kind of big and flashy. But when you really get down and nitpick it, they usually have pretty measly rotator cuff strength. And it's injury prevention is a very difficult concept to speak to, because when you go and you really analyze the data, you can't really predict who's going to become injured or not. But if I was to speak anecdotally, I would say the strength deficits in those isolated muscle groups is a huge problem in the climbing community.
Yeah, for sure. I think also just proportion, it's like what does the average climber train, like, big powerful movements and strength and power to rotator cuff ratio, like 1,000 to 1, maybe 10,000 to 1, it's like one day a calendar year, you do a couple like exterior rotations and you're like, all right, like we're good. So I'm not that surprised to hear that. That's something I've been trying to work on a lot more, is do like a lot more opening and a lot more stuff with TheraBands. And I find that it does help a lot alleviate like even shoulder pain and stabilize a little bit more and stuff, right?
For the shoulder injury, one thing I focus on a lot in my strength training is strengthening the posterior delt muscle. Correct me if I'm wrong. There's like 3 heads. You've got the anterior, the lateral, and the posterior. It seems like a lot of people rely more on the rhomboids and the trapezius rather than focusing on the strength of that rear delt. Do you think that's a pretty good cause of a lot of these shoulder injuries, is a deficient strength ratio of that particular muscle?
Yeah, and like that rear delt complex is pretty difficult to separate from that underlying rotator cuff complex. Kind of that rear delt overlies the kind of infraspinatus and the teres minor, and the muscles that kind of form that deeper shoulder complex. And so that is where that strength deficit usually occurs, is kind of on that posterior shoulder. So yes, I think people do really over rely on kind of the lats and the traps and whatever else. And when they get themselves into a situation which isn't that hard in climbing, that they're really having to provide some outward rotational force, they get themselves into trouble with the shoulder.
Yeah, totally. It just happened to a friend of mine, and that's like just first thing that came to mind. I'm like, let me check your rear delts. They're probably underdeveloped. So it's interesting to hear that is pretty true. And the pulleys, to circle back there real quick, I actually just sustained a pulley injury on my ring finger. So you said that so we've got 3 digits. You got the front, the middle, and the lower section of the finger. You're saying that in a bent position, a pulley injury can happen where the front digit overextends, it like hyperextends, and then you're stretching your pulley further past its anatomical position, therefore ripping the actual sheath that's holding the tendon in place.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's the interesting thing, is that pulleys are a very unique injury to the climbing population. You don't really see them elsewhere. And it really is just because when you have your finger hit that extended DIP, so that furthest joint, and that flexed PIP, so that middle joint, that's where that tendon is essentially attempting to bowstring, so kind of pull away from the bone there and kind of off the bone a little bit. And that's kind of the highest force position for where we see those pulley injuries. Now, the interesting thing is that when we examined pulleys back in the day, there was this kind of 400 Newton number, and if you actually look at, if you were to put all your force onto a pulley, you'd routinely exceed that with about 500 newtons of force, and so we'd be surprised that everyone's not blowing pulleys every single session, right?
Yeah.
But if you progressively overload this tissue, it can get thicker by about 50%. And it can actually grow to sustain about 1,000 newtons of force, and really the only way to start exceeding that level of force is by either dynamic movements or slipping, and really just kind of locking off and an unanticipated fall just on that one finger.
Yeah. Now, so there's three different kind of crimps. You've got like the open crimp, you've got the like crimp where you're in that bent position, and then you've got the full crimp with your thumb over the top. And the story goes that full crimp is the highest load. And I've known people to avoid putting their thumb on top of their finger because they're like, oh, I don't want to blow a pulley. In my understanding of this, the thumb is actually taking more pressure off of your fingers because you're actually loading the thumb as well as your fingers. Is that correct, or am I mistaken there?
It's okay. So there's a couple of things to dissect with that one too, and it's funny that people avoid this position, because this position is not only the most stable position of your hand to be in on smaller holds, it actually positions your center of gravity closer to the wall. And so the truth is when you get into a hold small enough, you physically won't be able to hold on to it in a different position.
Yeah.
And so what you've ended up doing by not training this close crimp position in a progressive manner is you've left this grip position almost more susceptible to injury.
Totally.
And that's becomes it's almost like someone avoiding sprints because they don't want to hurt a hamstring, and then they run as hard as they can and they hurt their hamstring. And it's just like, your body's not, it wasn't prepared for it, right? So
yeah,
it's something that blows. So really, when I'm rehabbing pulleys with my patients, I do get them to train the close crimp position, because it is a position that you're going to use, and it's not because you're not strong enough in the other positions, but because of how it alters your center of balance and kind of positions you a little bit better with the number of holds. So,
wow.
The thumb on top of it adds, but it also brings you a little bit tighter into that position, kind of locks things down a bit more. So it does kind of add a little bit more force when you look at it in the studies. But 300 newtons shouldn't be blowing your pulleys if you've done enough of a graded exposure to these movements.
Now, so it's interesting that you're saying it's adding more force. Can you dissect that a little bit more? Because and this is my ignorance speaking, to my understanding, when I'm doing that full crimp, because I love doing the full crimps, and I watched a video with Adam Ondra, and he was like really obsessed with using his pinkies. I remember very clearly, he's like, oh, I like to use the pinky, like the way he said it. And I was like, all right, cool. Like, I need to connect more with my pinkies and like rotate my hand a little bit out so I can start to load the outside of my finger more rather than it all being on these first 2-3 fingers. And I do the same with the thumbs. I like to engage my thumbs and try to disperse a lot of weight onto my thumbs and the outsides and use the entirety of my hand while I'm holding on to, especially a small hold. And so my understanding of using the thumb is trying to disperse that weight across my entire hand rather than it being located and isolated on specific fingers. Am I wrong in that assessment?
Oh, I get. Okay, yeah. So it's more the geometry of the fingers of what putting the thumb on top will do.
Gotcha.
Without the thumb on top, your fingers are almost in a little bit more of like a 90 degree. But if you were to notice what happens when you bring your thumb into that position, is it closes off it brings your palm closer to the tips of your fingers,
Okay.
and that changes the geometry of the finger joint there. So, um, and again, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It truly is a grip position that you need to use in a lot of climbs. And it's a position that's almost been demonized, almost like spinal flexion with deadlifts or with squats, right?
Totally.
It's something that we've taken a theoretical mechanical hypothesis and applied it to the practical nature without any research to back that up, right? So
Totally.
The principle is just like you need to just progressively overload it, right? So if you're worried about blowing your crimp, go find a hangboard with a pulley where you can offset weight, start off super light, and keep that on a regimented scale, and you could increase weight by like 10% or something, and then slowly build into that until maybe you get body weight or something,
Absolutely.
and like building into that and like getting your tissue to adapt. So I think that's probably the best way, at least that I can think of. So Quinn, maybe if you want to add something to that, but
you know what, that's exactly it. It truly is that progressive overload, and that can be said with way too many injuries, and that could probably even dissect a large portion of what I do for a job. Is that idea of progressive overload, and the body will adapt, and really it boils down to this mechanical stress quantification of, if you do too much too soon, too fast, or too new, you're going to get hurt. And if you prepare your body adequately, you won't get hurt. And so the same thing applies with pulleys.
Wow. Yeah. I was wondering if you could maybe just talk, because like I don't fully understand. So when you have a pulley snap, I've had that happen once in my life. You hear that audible click. What is actually happening to the pulley there causing the click? Like, is this like dislocating? Is it detaching from the bone? What is actually happening? What is the mechanism there? Not the mechanism, like what is the actual outcome there? And then, and then why is it taking so long to heal?
Yeah. So that's a good question, and it's kind of gross. So inside the hand, you kind of have give or take 5 annular pulleys. It really depends on the reference you look into, and you have 3 cruciform pulleys, which are kind of just form these X's across your fingers. And what those all work to do is they hold your tendon down to the bone there. When you have a pulley snap, and depending on the severity, it is really just that the pulley itself is ruptured, and so the tendon has bowstrung depending on how severe your injury is away from the tendon or away from the bone. So it really has created a situation where instead of 9 things holding your tendon down to the bone, you got 8. And so it's why it takes so long, is you basically need to scar over that injury. You need to reheal that ligament, and ligaments tend to have, or fibrocartilaginous tissue tend to have a long healing timeline. And that is why pulleys kind of take so long. But it really depends on the severity too. If you blow one pulley, you might be out for 6 weeks. If you blow kind of A2 through A4, you might be into a 6-month recovery. It really depends on where and how badly you did that. But it really is the rupture. That is what you hear, and that is what's kind of gross with it.
To my understanding, it's like they're like little tubes that like wrap around the tendons, and like the string, the tendon itself, like cuts through the sheath and leaves it splayed open. And I'm pretty sure you can, like you said, different severities. Not only can you pull more pulley, like you can pop more than one pulley at a single time, but I'm pretty sure you can also like partially rupture a pulley. Like maybe you just like tear the top of it and not all the way through. And that's going to be a faster healing process, just because you have a smaller amount of anatomy to heal and to scar up, as you said. And in terms of recovery process for these, obviously nutrition wise, we're talking collagen, we're talking, healthy diets, and, the big rule of thumb for these injuries is to stay off of it. How long would you say that process is important, and at what point do you need to start loading that tissue again? Just like the concussion, like you don't want to avoid it forever, because you're not going to build that strength back. You're not going to get blood flow back to the area to promote healing. So at what point, obviously this depends on the severity, what are some clues that you can start to realize that it's time to start loading the hand, maybe just by like, maybe you're a 512 climber and you popped it on a tiny crimp. Like, when can you start climbing on jugs again? Like, at what point is that process safe to start climbing, and how can you listen to your body?
Oh, for sure. So again, yeah, you're right. It depends on the severity, but a more severe pulley injury, that's one that you kind of heard an audible pop. It's quite swollen. It got quite painful. We tend to try and immobilize those for about 10 days. And after that brief immobilization period, we start to do very kind of gentle active range of motion and passive range of motions. Once it's become a point where it's not so tender to touch, and we can be reasonably sure that there's no large element of bowstringing, so the tendon's not flapping away from the bone there, we start doing kind of function specific exercise. So this is where we're just starting to gently load that pulley as early as kind of 2 weeks after this injury. Not necessarily back into the gym and back into climbing, but we're loading it in a meaningful function specific way. Some patients really, it might take 4 weeks to get there. It might take 6 weeks to get there, but I tend to have a lot of the pulleys I see back into the gym climbing on jugs within kind of the 3 to 4 week mark.
Cool. Awesome to hear. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I just went through a pulley injury myself. 4 years ago, I ruptured the A2 on both ring fingers almost within 2 weeks of each other. And they were the first time I've ever injured those pulleys before. So I had no idea what I was doing, and I kept climbing on them. And so I'm sure I fully ruptured both the A2s because like the lower digit was swollen. It was super painful. I noticed I couldn't clench a fist all the way because I wasn't able to clench a fist all the way without it being painful. And so that I knew was really bad. And this time I felt the pop and immediately let go of the wall and jumped down and stopped immediately. And that was about 10 days ago. And today I just started climbing again, and I was able to get up on jugs and stuff. I was just like super cognizant about like what fingers I was loading, how small the hold was, and I was able to get through without any injuries, and it feels really good. So it's just, it's interesting to hear the progression, and there's definitely circumstantial kind of situations for everybody's injury.
For sure, man. Kyle, I think that's a great place to wrap up on injuries and stuff. Did you have anything else you wanted to ask, or?
No, man. Yeah, I think that for me, that's the meat and potatoes. I think we got most of it.
For sure. So Quinn, I guess, what are some things that you're excited or passionate for in the mountains? You know, what's getting you excited?
Oh man, that's, you know what? A lot of it. So it doesn't take much for me to have a good day in the hills, but my favorite time out is in the Alpine. That seems to be where I thrive, and that's what I really, really dig. So that's where my heart is for sure, is getting up high and kind of moving fast in the Alpine and being as efficient as we can and kind of covering as much territory as we can. But again, I'm out there for fun. I could have a pretty close as good of a day just cragging or going for a hike up the Chief. It really doesn't matter to me, to be honest.
Is there any kind of specific like climb or objective that you kind of have your heart set on for this this season?
Oh man, I'm keeping my expectations nice and low. Whatever the bird takes us to.
That's fair, man.
I seem to get off work early on Tuesdays, and we make our way up to Squamish, and we've been able to make an apron lap every Tuesday for the last couple of weeks. So that's kept me pretty stoked for the week so far.
Awesome, man. Favorite route on the apron?
Oh, you know what? We just did the south of Rhett, and I was very pleasantly surprised. That was a hidden gem back there. Really, really cool.
South of Rhett, just to the left of St. Vitus?
Yeah, right to the left, just snug in between, right in the middle of 30 meters of really awkward bushwhacking.
Yeah. No, really totally. Cool. I've done that. It's a beautiful climb. It's a lot of fun. Yeah. Wicked, man. Yeah. Well, hopefully we can share a rope sometime or go climbing. I'd really love to meet you in person and stuff. And I just want to thank you, for taking your time coming on the show. This has been a fascinating conversation, man. And you're very, very knowledgeable. And so it's been a blast and I've learned a lot. So I really appreciate that.
Awesome, man. Glad to hear. Oh, thank you guys for having me.
Definitely, man. Yeah, we dove deep into these topics. I think it's been really, really informative for everybody, including myself. And yeah, thank you so much for your time, and it's been a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, perfect. I guess before I let you guys go, maybe I'll just do a shameless plug and just say if anyone's struggling on the podcast with injuries, I'm on the North Shore at Bodywork Sports, and I'm downtown at Kinematic Sport Med and Rehab if you need to get in touch.
Thank you all so much for subscribing and listening to our podcast. We've been seeing great reviews and ratings start to pop up on Spotify and Apple. This means so much to us and helps keep the fire going for this project. If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you get your podcasts.